The Chicago Bears made a lot of progress through the first 4 games of the season, and they entered the bye week at 2-2, about right where we thought they would be. And yet, we still can't tell if this team is actually any good.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And on the show today, I want to check in on the Bears' progress through the first 4 weeks of the season and try and figure out just how good this team actually is. Because on the one hand, they've won the last 2 games in a row. They've improved throughout these first 4 games of the season, and they feel like a team that's on the precipice of playing even better football moving forward. On the other hand, they've struggled quite a bit through these first 4 games and have some real weaknesses that feel like they aren't going away. So ultimately, the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. But I want to start with the case for why this is actually a good football team and a team that we should be really encouraged about coming out of the bye. Then we'll get into the reasons why maybe we shouldn't be too encouraged, and then we'll kind of land the plane somewhere in that happy medium. But I think from a positive perspective right now, you can look at this Bears team on a 2-game winning streak, which is not something we've experienced a lot in the last handful of seasons, and certainly something you can be excited about and should be excited about, and feel like this is a offense that is starting to really click, at least in the passing game. Caleb Williams is hitting receivers on time. Rome Odunze looks like a stud. You're still getting DJ Moore, Olamide Zaccheaus involved in the offense. Luther Burden finally finding a little bit of a role, and despite Cole Kmet's drops and penalties, he's getting open and being available for plays there, and you feel like he can get back to being a better player. And all of that is happening in spite of issues on the offensive line. The pass protection hasn't been necessarily where you want it to be, and yet Caleb Williams is still playing really well and taking fewer sacks and not holding onto the ball too long and getting a passing game going with an imperfect offensive line and with a very limited running game. They have not been able to lean on the dimension of the offense that was kind of supposed to be the most important thing here. Ben Johnson comes in as a kind of a run-first reputation offensive coordinator. The feeling was maybe the Bears' passing game would take a little time to come together, but that they should be able to run the ball right out of the gate because Ben Johnson always schemes up the running game really well. That's his reputation he came in with. And so the fact that they've been able to be successful on offense without the thing that was supposed to be their bread and butter, and a lot of the identity of the offense suggests that they're doing a lot of things right. And imagine how good they can be once they actually start running the ball. They're doing what were supposed to be the hard parts, the parts that were slower to develop already, and that the running game is supposed to be the easier part. So imagine once they get to the easy part, what they can actually do. And defensively, it feels like a team that is also achieving well enough despite their flaws, and that they can get better and still be even better than we're seeing already. They're making plays, they're generating turnovers, and not just accidental turnovers where it's just sort of good luck where the quarterback is bad and overthrows it right into your hands, but Tremaine Edmonds stepping in front of a pass against the Cowboys, and Kevin Byard stepping in front of multiple passes against the Raiders, and Tyreek Stevenson ripping the ball out of a running back's hand against Dallas. This is a team that is finding ways to make plays and make stops despite injuries across the defense and a struggling run defense. And it's a similar feeling of hey, imagine how good this defense can be once they get a little bit healthier. Once you add Kyler Gordon and TJ Edwards back into the mix here, and once Grady Jarrett returns from the injury he's dealing with now, this defense already is doing a good enough job to beat the Cowboys and the Raiders, not at full strength. And imagine if they can start stopping the run a little bit better. Like, I think the overall big picture here is like, this team is 2-2, finding ways to win football games, back-to-back football games, despite heavy, significant flaws on both sides of the ball. And you can feel like it's a team that has made significant progress from the first 2 weeks to the third and fourth week of the season. And as that progress continues, you can see them take even more steps forward with a bye week to reflect on that and to find the different ways to continue. With a bye week to get healthier, in theory, on both sides of the ball. And to say, okay, how can they fix this running game? How can they improve this offensive line? How can they fix this run defense? How can they generate more of a pass rush? And you can start to talk yourself into this team really being on the precipice of something greater, of not to be, deep playoff run Super Bowl contenders, but of being like a legitimately good team that can compete with the teams coming up on their schedule, and a team that feels significantly farther away from where they were in the fourth quarter against the Vikings and for really the whole game against the Detroit Lions. And you can even point to those two games and say, well, divisional games are always kind of a little bit of a wild card that, we've seen over the last few seasons that even when the Bears were bad, they played really good Lions teams close every single time. Like, all these NFC North games, generally speaking, usually tend to be not necessarily reflective of how good the individual teams are on the grander scale, because you play these teams twice a year and you know these schemes and you know these opposing players better. And it's just not quite the same as your non-conference or non-divisional opponents on your schedule that might give you a better sense of how you actually stack up with the rest of the league. So you can go into the bye week and then, come out of the bye week with, 6 or 7 straight games without facing an NFC North team and feel like, okay, they can keep up with teams like, Commanders, Saints, injured Ravens, injured Bengals. You got the Giants in there as well, and feel like, oh, this team can come out and, I don't want to say make some noise, because again, no one's expecting them to become some like serious deep playoff contender, but a team that sits at 2-2 right now and can be, maybe above 500 moving forward after a little bit of a rocky start. It's not hard to talk yourself into this team ascending and continuing to ascend from this point. I also think it's not hard to talk yourself into the opposite perspective. And I could imagine from a national media perspective, or just someone outside of Chicago, they might look at this team a little bit differently and say, yeah, they've won the last 2 games, but can we really trust them? Can we really trust that as progress? Or has that just been a little bit more a result of the teams they've played and the situations they've been in? But really, this isn't actually a good team. They're just sort of like balancing out a little bit from being horrendous against the Lions, and they're always going to kind of exist in this lower tier. So we'll take a look at some of the things that might leave you less optimistic about this team, and then we'll come back and kind of find the truth somewhere in the middle next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and you'll get $300 in bonus bets if you win. So that's right, you pick a bet, put down just $5, and if it hits, not only do you get the winnings from your $5 bet, but you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. It makes watching football even more exciting when you've got a little something extra riding on the action, especially this Sunday when the Bears are on the bye, so there's no Bears game to tune in for. You'll get whatever game is on your local broadcast station. You might not have that much of a rooting interest, but you have a $5 bet on one of those teams or a prop bet in the game or any other sport, any other game. If you hit that bet, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets. So whether you're a casual fan or you love diving in deep into the stats, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Locked On Bears is also brought to you by Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Because we know with athletes, footwork and breath work and all the details, they're really sweating every inch. And Mazda brings the same intention to how they craft every model. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride, with more IIHS Top Safety Pick awards than anyone else. You can feel the Japanese craftsmanship in every detail, from the metallic accents to available Napa leather upholstery. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. With all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. So like the players, Mazda sweats every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda. Move and be moved. So you can find yourself saying, hey, 2-game winning streak, Bears are figuring a lot of stuff out. That should portend to be more success in the future, especially with a bye week to get healthier. On the other end, I can hear first of all, the Bears PTSD of like, can we ever trust that this team is actually turning a corner and being good? But I can also hear the sort of like outsider national media perspective of like, yeah, they're 2-2, but, and it becomes a big but. But they beat up on a really bad Dallas Cowboys defense that everybody's putting up 40 points on. So it's not that impressive for them to win that game. And then they go and play the Raiders in week 4 and barely squeak out a win. You needed a blocked field goal to save your rear end after a comeback fourth quarter touchdown drive. Like, they needed a series of events to all go positively to beat a Raiders team that also isn't that good. And that all comes after you absolutely blew it in week 1 against the Minnesota Vikings, and you looked abysmal against the Detroit Lions. So you had like 5 straight quarters of horrendous and feeling like a Matt Eberflus team. And then you beat up a bad Matt Eberflus defense and barely squeak out a win over a bad Raiders team. And we're supposed to have a lot of confidence that this team is now on the precipice of something great. Like, I think outsiders will look at this team and say, yeah, the Bears were pretty evenly matched with a 1-3 Raiders team. And no one would have been that surprised if the Bears had lost that game. And if the Bears were 1-3. And so they're probably closer to a 1-3 team than a 2-2 team that's on the rise and, ready to start beating good teams. Because I think you can look at this Bears roster and convince yourself that, hey, not only do they have some big flaws, which I think everyone can agree they got some big flaws, but more importantly, how fixable are those big flaws? That maybe some of these problems that they can overcome against the Raiders and the Cowboys are not going to get fixed, and they're not going to be able to overcome those against better opponents coming up on the schedule. Start with the offensive line, where, okay, you're swapping out Braxton Jones for Theo Benedett at left tackle, but you're not going to find too many people saying, oh yeah, that former undrafted free agent who's never started a game in his career, never started a game at left tackle in his career. I guess he made his first career start against the Raiders at right tackle, fair enough. But like that former UDFA who was a practice squad player, I guess injured reserve player, but wasn't making the 53 last year, is he going to be a huge upgrade at left tackle? Probably not. Can he be better? Maybe. But also, plugging him in at left tackle, swapping out left tackles, not going to solve all the Bears' problems on the offensive line. And we talked about that more in depth on yesterday's podcast. So go take a listen back to that if you haven't already, because we talked about some of the issues at left tackle, but then also on the interior and in the running game that are a little more complicated than just, like, not all the problems fall on Braxton Jones' shoulder. And so you're not going to come into week 5 and say, oh, offensive line is fixed because Theo Benedett is in there instead of Braxton Jones. That feels like a group that's not going to necessarily ruin every game, but continue to be a weakness and a flaw that they have to overcome. And how well do you trust them to be able to overcome that against playoff caliber teams instead of, again, a 1-3 Raiders team and a Cowboys team that continues to look worse and worse? Same thing is true with the pass rush. There's no, magic solution coming to save the Bears pass rush. The guys they got are the guys they got. We're not expecting a Trey Hendrickson trade at the deadline to boost that group. It's Sweat, it's Odangbo, it's Jervon Dexter. Great, Jarrett's hurt, but he wasn't playing well before he got hurt, and him coming back healthy isn't going to just fix this Bears pass rush and this Bears defensive line. Like, they're contributing to the run defense issues, and they're not getting after the quarterback fast enough. And where are they supposed to all of a sudden get better? We can talk about other ends of the defense. Your slot cornerback is going to get better. Maybe your other linebackers are going to get better when Kyler Gordon and TJ Edwards come back. But like, Austin Booker might come off injured reserve, but he's not going to fix the pass rush issues. He'll add something, sure, but kind of like the offensive line. Like, okay, swapping out Braxton Jones with Theo Benedett, you'll get a little bit better. adding Austin Booker back in there whenever he comes off injured reserve, sure, it'll make you a little bit better, but it's not going to solve all of their pass rush issues. Just like I think Kyler Gordon coming back and TJ Edwards coming back isn't going to solve some of the vulnerabilities on the back end. Like, you're still going to have Nashawn Wright as one of your top 3 cornerbacks in that group, and he's not going to all of a sudden turn into an instantly great player. I mean, I guess Tyreek Stevenson made a pretty close to that kind of a drastic transition, so I guess never say never that Nashawn Wright could become this potentially better player over time, sure, but like Jalen Johnson ain't going to be back for any time soon, maybe late in the season, but for now, you got to live with some holes there and some ups and downs there, and they will get a little bit better, but it just feels like some really concrete weaknesses, and not just like lasting weaknesses, but like really, really important weaknesses. Like, yeah, O-line and D-line, kind of two of the biggest things after quarterback that matter the most here, that can be lingering. And yeah, when that's the Philadelphia Eagles that you're going up against, a little harder to overcome there. Like, the teams you're playing are going to get tougher than the Raiders and the Cowboys. Not every week necessarily, but even coming after the bye week. Jaden Daniels sounds like he's returned to practice for the Washington Commanders. So all of a sudden, that game becomes a little more difficult than we might have thought it would be with Marcus Mariota. But even with Marcus Mariota, that Commanders team was not horrible, falling apart, unable to accomplish anything along the way. I mean, they did lose to the Falcons, but they put up 27 points in the process, and they put up 41 on the Raiders before that, and even gave the Packers a run for their money in week 2. So like, it's a team that is still has been a top 10 offense consistently, and they've been a top 20 defense so far this season. Like, it's going to be a tough Commanders team that's tougher than what the Bears faced the last 2 weeks, and it's going to be another big test. And we could go game by game through the schedule if you want, but that's not the point. The point is that, yes, better teams will be in the future, and just because you beat up on the bad Raiders and the bad Cowboys doesn't mean all of a sudden that you've fixed everything, that you're going to be able to take on any old opponent that gets thrown your way. Now, obviously, I think you can hear in that maybe an overarching pessimism there. Like, yeah, I was being intentionally pessimistic there, in addition to being maybe intentionally optimistic in the first part there. And so usually in life and in reality, the truth lies somewhere in the middle, right? It's not black and white. It's not either everything's great or everything's bad, but it's probably more like, hey, some things are good and some things are bad. And I think that's where the Bears are going to kind of exist for the rest of this season for the most part. So I want to go a little bit more specifically into like where that actually leaves the 2-2 Bears, because maybe at the end of the day, they're sitting at 500 right now, and maybe they're just kind of a 500 football team where you can't say, oh, that's a good team, but also they're not a bad team. They're somewhere in the middle. We'll take a look at what that might look like for the remaining, 13 games of the season, next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by Gametime. The NFL season is back, and there's nothing better than being in the stadium, surrounded by fans, and cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting tickets is a hassle. Between queues, login screens, and prices jumping up at checkout, it can be really frustrating. But that's why I use Gametime. I've got the app on my phone because it gives the advantage back to the fans. Gametime is fast, easy, and backed by the Gametime guarantee, where you'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. And my favorite part is that they've got all-in pricing that's got the fees included, so the price you see is the price you pay by the time you get to checkout. I've used Gametime to go to Bears games. I've gone to baseball games. You want to go to playoffs, see how the Cubs do as things keep rolling here. Concerts, comedy shows, theater events, you name it. They've got it all in the Gametime app. And you can even see your view from your seat in the venue before you purchase your tickets. So download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Gametime today. So maybe this Chicago Bears team is just more like a 500 team, and like that's okay. Like, that's better than they were at 0-2 when they looked pretty abysmal. It's maybe a little worse than they looked against the Cowboys and maybe a little closer to how they looked against the Las Vegas Raiders. Like I keep coming back to feeling like that game in its entirety kind of feels like this is who the Bears team is going to be, where it's going to be ugly. They're going to find some ways to win. There's going to be things to like, and there's going to be some real flaws that are, that are actual obstacles you're going to have to overcome. And ultimately, I think this Bears team will be good enough to beat the bad teams, but not good enough to beat the good teams. Like, I think these issues that we talk about with, run blocking and even some pass protection on the offensive line, probably not going to go away. I mean, that's I think a real reasonable criticism and concern that, like, yeah, Darnell Wright gets healthy, that'll help. Maybe Theo Bennett can be an upgrade over Braxton Jones, and I think over time, the Tooney, Dahlman, Jackson interior can keep settling in a little bit and maybe play a little bit better. But I don't think we're ever going to get to the point this season where it's like, ooh, this offensive line is solved and everything is locked in and they're clicking on all cylinders. Like, it's always going to be a factor in games that you have to account for. And I think the same thing is going to be true for the defensive line. Like, Montez Sweat will probably play better as the season goes on. Even Dio Dengbo, I bet, will show some improvement as the year goes on. Dexter, I think, is already playing pretty well. Grady Jarrett can bounce back a little bit. Like, I think that group will get better, but we're never going to get to the point where it's like, oh, that's a top 10 defensive line or a top 10 offensive line. Like, Dennis Allen can probably scheme up a better pass rush than we've seen so far and find ways to generate pressure on quarterbacks. Like, I think it can and will be better, but not fixed. And I think those kind of flaws will definitely keep them behind good teams that don't have those flaws. Again, like I come back to the Eagles. I was going to say the Packers, but they showed some more flaws against the Cowboys. Like in the NFL, there's a lot of volatility and a lot of parity that leaves the Bears, I think, somewhere in the middle here. But like you've got the teams on your schedule that end up going to the playoffs, they're going to be enough better than you that you can't overcome offensive and defensive line issues. Even if they're not, the worst offensive line or the worst defensive line, it can be enough to keep you from beating those teams. But I think the Raiders and the Cowboys game, but especially the Raiders game, showed you that like even those flaws won't kill you against bad teams. Like, yeah, against bad teams, you can give up 150 plus rushing yards to Ashton Genty and still win the game. You can give up batted passes to Max Crosby and an interception by Max Crosby and pressure from Max Crosby and still win the game. Like, that's kind of the difference here. And that, I think, leaves the Chicago Bears as a little bit more of a, middle of the pack type of football team, which is in a lot of ways kind of where we expected them to be when this season started. We talk on this podcast about, probably about a 9-win team. I think the FanDuel win total preseason was 8.5, which is exactly 500. It would be 8.5, obviously you can't win 8.5 games, but the expectation baseline was, hey, probably about 500. And so in some ways, nothing has changed, and in other ways, it feels like everything's changed. I mean, from what we thought coming into week one and how bad they played and then how good they played, it's been a roller coaster. It's been kind of a wild back and forth. I do think, especially coming out of the bye week, this Bears team will get better with health. TJ Edwards and Kyler Gordon are going to come back, and this defense is going to play better. Colston Loveland's coming back. This offense should be better. We'll see about Darnell Wright's injury status. He's still not practicing quite yet. Grady Jarrett's still not practicing quite yet, but like injuries and recovery will help this team play better. That being said, we think a lot about, hey, they're going to get healthier. We don't account for, hey, there could be more injuries. Like Darnell Wright should be as obvious of a clue of this as like, hey, yeah, we've all been excited for when Edwards and Gordon are going to be back, how much better they'll be. But then when you lose a right tackle along the way, it makes life more difficult. And other guys on both sides of the ball are going to get hurt. Like the Bears are going to have injuries. You hope they're as minor as possible and not season ending or anything like that. But like injuries are an unavoidable part of the game. It's not a matter of if you get injuries, it's how many and how severe. And so that's another aspect of like, you can't just say, oh, they're going to get healthier and then play better from here on out, because they will get healthier and play better. And then they'll get less healthy and play worse. And then those guys will come back from injury and they'll play better. And then new guys will get hurt. Like that's just a reality of football, how well you can absorb those injuries with your depth. And you hope that that if you got to have injuries, it's at positions you're a little bit deeper and not at positions you're a little bit thinner. And I think we've seen some of that where it's like, you can't afford another injury at cornerback with Jalen Johnson and Kyler Gordon out along the way. And then, of course, you see like Jalen Jones has been hurt and Charles Smith has been hurt. But maybe there's other positions. I don't even want to speak it into existence. But I think there are other positions on this roster where you feel a little bit better about your backups. And maybe you could temporarily lose a player at certain spots and get by better than you can at other spots. I also think you look ahead, like if you come a little bit more to the present and not just like big picture conceptual stuff, but just like this Bears schedule seems to be getting more favorable on paper than it looked in the offseason and even in the preseason. I mean, we talk about the Commanders after the bye week with Jaden Daniels coming back. Maybe they're not quite in this category, but then you got the Saints in week 7 that are, I would just say not a very good football team. They're in the competition to potentially be picking, number 1 overall this upcoming NFL draft. Like that should be a pretty winnable game. And then the Ravens and Bengals back-to-back looked like really difficult games that you would think are going to be losses on paper. But now the Ravens defense is really bad and Lamar Jackson's hurt. And we'll see, he might be back by the time the Bears play the Ravens. But if he's not, is Cooper Rush going to be the starter? You might be able to beat a Ravens team with Cooper Rush that you didn't think you could beat the Ravens with Lamar Jackson. And then the Bengals without Joe Burrow have just been abysmal. The defense we knew was bad. The offense is really bad without the quarterback kind of propping everything up. And then the Giants in week 10 with Jackson Dart, rookie quarterback, team's kind of in desperation right now. That could be winnable games. You could have 4 really winnable games in a row with Saints, Ravens, Bengals, Giants, and then Commanders are not out of reach by any means. And we saw the Vikings in week 11 now after playing them in week 1. Not a team that was out of reach at that point. So it's easy to say, hey, this Bears team might not be that good and might not be great, might not be terrible, but they're going to be playing a bunch of teams over the next 6 weeks that also aren't playing particularly well right now. And maybe between now and week 9, 10, 11, those teams will change a little bit. But for now, you're not going into nearly as much of a murderer's row in October as we might have thought. November with Steelers, Eagles, Packers twice might still be a little bit tricky, but the point being this Bears team can hang with at least the next 5 or 6 teams on their schedule, or at least, 5 or 6 out of the next 7 teams on their schedule are not going to be these elite playoff teams that are going to blow you out of the water. So maybe you can even go above 500 over that stretch. Say over the next 6 games, you go 4-2, and then as a team, you're sitting at 6-4 there. It's not a bad stretch at all things considered. You feeling like that's playoff contending team there. I mean, maybe that's a little bit too wishful thinking, but even if we go 500 over these next 6 games, you're sitting at 5-5, you're right there in the mix. So this Bears team is a little bit enigmatic in this way where maybe they're Schrodinger's team. They're neither good nor bad. I don't know, but it does feel like we are going to learn a lot about them over the next 5 or 6 games as to how good they actually are and whether the progress against the Cowboys and Raiders is real. Do they play down to the Saints and is that a close game, or do they blow them out of the water? Can they push a Ravens team that still has a lot of talent but just isn't playing that well, or do the Ravens get right against the Chicago Bears? A lot is still up in the air and to be determined, and I think it starts with figuring out how closely they play the Commanders and how much revenge they get over last year's post-bye week primetime football game. So we'll have plenty of time to break down that Commanders matchup coming up here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and that includes all of your favorite teams. So if you want to follow Cubs playoff baseball, go check out Locked On Cubs. If you want to get ready for the Bulls season, go check out Locked On Bulls. Blackhawks season is around the corner too with Locked On Blackhawks. Obviously, White Sox are kind of in off-season mode with Locked On Sox, but nonetheless, we've got a Locked On Podcast Network team, or Locked On Podcast Network podcast for all of your other favorite teams, including college sports. If you want to follow your Illini and Brett Bielema down there, or whatever team you root for, we've got you covered. So go make another Locked On podcast your second listen of the day. Coming back tomorrow, make Locked On Bears your first listen once again for another opportunity to bear down.